The house smelled like lemon polish and something else I couldn't name. Something sharp underneath the clean. I noticed it the first morning I woke up in that house as his wife, and I told myself it was just old wood. Just a big house settling into itself. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things that first week. My name is not important right now. What matters is that I am 63 years old, I have worked as a home health nurse for 22 years, and I know what medications smell like. I know what they look like. I know what happens to a person's body when the wrong thing goes into it. That knowledge is the reason my husband is alive today. And it is the reason his son is in a federal prison in the state of Florida. Let me start from the beginning, because none of it makes sense unless you understand where I was before any of this happened. My youngest daughter had been sick since she was 19. Lupus, then a kidney complication that the doctors said would require a transplant within 2 years if she didn't get the right treatment. The treatment existed. It was being used successfully at a clinic in Houston. It was also $47,000 out of pocket because her insurance classified it as experimental. She was 26 years old and she was running out of time, and I had nothing. I had my house, a 12-year-old Honda Civic, and a savings account with enough in it to cover maybe 3 months of her medication. Not the treatment, just the medication to keep her stable while we waited for a miracle. The miracle came from an unlikely place. It came from my patient. I had been assigned to care for Arthur in early spring. He was 74, recently diagnosed with a degenerative heart condition that his cardiologist said would take him within 6 months, possibly sooner. He lived alone in a house in Sarasota. A beautiful house right on the water, the kind of house I had spent my whole life driving past and never imagining I would set foot inside. He had been married once for 31 years, to a woman named Margaret who had died of cancer 4 years earlier. He had 1 son from that marriage. He had more money than I had ever been in the same room with. I want to be honest with you because that is the only way this story makes sense. When Arthur first suggested the arrangement, when he sat across from me at his kitchen table on a Tuesday afternoon and told me very calmly that he was considering asking me to marry him, my first thought was not romantic. My first thought was my daughter. My second thought was that I must have misheard him. I had not misheard him. He explained it simply. He was dying, and he knew it. He did not want to die alone, and he did not trust his son to manage his estate or to honor the charitable foundations he had spent 20 years building. He had spoken with his attorney. He had thought about this for several weeks. If I agreed to become his wife, I would receive a salary as his primary caregiver, access to his medical coverage, and upon his death, a portion of the estate sufficient to cover my daughter's treatment, and then some. He was not asking me to love him. He was asking me to be present, to be honest with him, to keep him company through whatever time he had left. I asked him if he was serious. He said he had never been more serious about anything since the day he asked Margaret to marry him. I went home that night, and I sat at my kitchen table until 2 in the morning. I called my daughter. I did not tell her what Arthur had proposed. I just wanted to hear her voice, wanted to hear her laugh at something her roommate had said, wanted to remember why I was considering saying yes to something that made no logical sense in the world I thought I lived in. I said yes the next morning. We were married 6 weeks later at the courthouse with his attorney and my sister as witnesses. My daughter cried when I told her. She thought it was the most romantic thing she had ever heard. I did not correct her. The first month was quieter than I expected. Arthur was a reader. He had a library in the east wing of the house, actual floor-to-ceiling shelves, rolling ladder, the whole thing, and he spent most of his mornings in there with coffee and whatever biography he was working through. I managed his medications, cooked when he didn't want the housekeeper to, and we ate dinner together every evening at 6. He asked about my daughter every day. He remembered the names of her doctors. He asked follow-up questions that showed he had actually been listening the week before. I started to like him. That surprised me. His son arrived on a Thursday in my 3rd week there. I heard the car in the driveway before I saw him, a black SUV, parked at an angle that blocked half the front walk. He was 46, tall with his father's jawline and none of his father's patience. His name was Preston, and from the moment he walked through that door and found me in the kitchen, something was wrong between us. He looked at me the way people look at something they believe does not belong to them but resents anyway. He was pleasant enough on the surface. He shook my hand. He thanked me for taking care of his father. He asked, with a smile that did not reach his eyes, how long I had been a nurse. Arthur introduced me as his wife. Preston's smile did not change, but something behind it did. He stayed for 4 days. During those 4 days I noticed things I could not yet name as a pattern. He brought food. said he'd stopped at a place Arthur loved on the way down, a Cuban restaurant in Tampa. He offered to manage Arthur's evening medications on the nights he was there, said he wanted to give me a break. I thanked him and said I was fine, that managing medications was my job, and I watched something flicker across his face before he nodded and walked out to the porch. The morning after he left, Arthur was worse, not dramatically worse, not the kind of worse that calls for an ambulance. The kind of worse that a person who doesn't work in medicine might chalk up to the natural progression of a serious illness: increased fatigue, more confusion than usual, a tremor in his left hand that his neurologist had not mentioned. I am a nurse. I have been a nurse for 22 years. I know the difference between a disease progressing and something else happening to a body. I checked his medications that afternoon. The bottles on the nightstand were the right labels, the right dosages. But something had been nagging at me since the night. Preston offered to take over the evening routine. And I had learned a long time ago not to ignore the thing that nags. I called in a favor from a pharmacist I had worked with for 15 years. I told her I had some unmarked capsules I'd found while cleaning, and I wanted to confirm what they were before I disposed of them. She said, "Bring them in." I did not bring in the capsules from the labeled bottles. I brought in 3 capsules I had quietly removed from a bottle that Preston had added to the nightstand without mentioning it, a supplement, he'd said when I asked. Good for the heart. His own cardiologist recommended it. Arthur's cardiologist had recommended no such supplement. My pharmacist friend called me 2 hours later. She was careful about how she said it, but the bottom line was clear. The capsules contained a combination of compounds that, in a person with Arthur's specific heart condition, would accelerate cardiac deterioration. Gradually, undetectably unless someone was specifically looking, it would look, to any doctor reviewing the chart, like the disease was simply progressing faster than expected. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the pharmacy for a long time. Then I called Arthur's attorney. His name was Mr. Fenn, and he had been Arthur's lawyer for 18 years. I had met him twice before, once at the wedding, and once when Arthur had revised a section of his will 3 weeks into our marriage. He was 71 and wore the kind of suits that do not go out of style. He listened to everything I told him without interrupting. When I finished, there was a silence on the line, and then he said, "How certain are you?" I told him I was certain enough to have a lab analysis within the week, and certain enough to call him before I confronted anyone. He said, "Good. Don't confront anyone. Do not change your behavior at all. Come to my office Thursday." I did not change my behavior. I cooked Arthur's dinner. I managed his medications, his actual medications, which I now prepared myself in the kitchen where I could see every step. I removed the supplement bottle and replaced it with a different bottle containing capsules I had emptied and refilled with the proper dosage of his existing heart medication. I kept the original capsules for the lab. Preston called that Wednesday. He was warm, easy, asked how his father was doing. I told him Arthur was tired but in good spirits. I asked Preston when he was planning to visit again, and I wrote down his answer. Thursday, I met with Mr. Fenn. He had not been idle. In the days since my call, he had quietly reviewed Arthur's estate documents and had already identified several anomalies. Loan request Arthur had supposedly signed, transfers to a holding company, Preston had established 3 years earlier. Things Arthur had no memory of approving, which Mr. Fenn had attributed to Arthur's declining health. He looked at me across his desk and said, "I owe your husband an apology." I told him we could sort out apologies later. We built a case carefully over 3 weeks, and I want to say that those 3 weeks were the hardest of my life. I went home to that house every night and sat with Arthur, and watched the news and made his tea and did not tell him what I knew, because Mr. Fenn had advised me strongly to wait until we had everything documented. Every morning I woke up afraid that the previous night would be the one where something happened that we could not undo. I made sure it wasn't. I know what I'd gave him and what I didn't. I know every medication that entered my husband's body during those 3 weeks. Preston arrived on a Saturday in early June for what he called a check-in visit. He brought flowers for me, which was new, and a bottle of wine, and a small paper bag from the Cuban restaurant that he set on the kitchen counter. Mr. Fenn arrived 40 minutes later with 2 detectives from the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office and a warrant. I was in the kitchen when I heard the door. I heard Preston's voice shift, not break, exactly, but change frequency in the way a voice does when a person realizes something has gone wrong. I stayed in the kitchen. I held on to the counter and I breathed slowly. Arthur came out of the library. He stood in the hallway in his reading glasses and his old cardigan, and he looked at his son for a long moment. I do not know what passed between them in that moment. I was not in the room, but Arthur told me later that Preston said nothing. He just looked at the floor. They took Preston in for questioning that afternoon. The charges that followed over the next several months include elder financial abuse, attempted murder by poison, and multiple counts of fraud involving the forged documents Mr. Fenn had flagged. The holding company was dissolved. The transferred funds were recovered. A doctor who had been receiving payments from Preston to falsify medication recommendations lost his license. Arthur improved, slowly, steadily, the way a person improves when the thing that was hurting them is removed. His cardiologist was cautious. His heart condition was real, and it wasn't gone, and there were no promises about timelines. But 3 months after Preston's arrest, Arthur walked me to the end of the dock behind the house, and we watched the sun go down over the water, and he said, "I think I might have a little more time than they told me." I squeezed his hand. I did not say anything. The financial piece was settled before the criminal trial. My daughter received her treatment in Houston that autumn. I sat in the waiting room during her procedure with Arthur's hand in mine, and I thought about the strange roads that bring a person to a moment. I had not planned to love this man. I had not planned any of this. I had planned to do my job and to save my child and to go home. But Arthur had asked me good questions every night at dinner for 6 months. He had remembered the names of every person I mentioned more than once. He had listened to me the way people listen when they actually want to know you, not just hear you. And somewhere in those evenings, in that library smell and the sound of water off the dock, I had stopped thinking of myself as his caretaker. I thought of myself as his wife. The trial was not easy. Preston's attorney tried several angles, claimed I had manipulated an elderly man, that the marriage itself was the con, that I was the one who stood to benefit most and therefore bore the most suspicion. The pharmacist testified. Mr. Fenn testified. The lab analysis was entered into evidence. The doctor who had been paid to falsify recommendations cooperated with the prosecution in exchange for a reduced sentence and testified against Preston directly. The jury deliberated for 1 day. One day, Preston is serving 12 years. Arthur and I still live in the house in Sarasota. He is 75 now. His heart condition is managed. We see his cardiologist every 6 weeks, and we do not take anything for granted. Some mornings he sleeps late, and I sit on the dock with my coffee and I watch the pelicans, and I think about how close it was. How close all of it was. The wrong supplement bottle, if I had not happened to notice. A few more weeks, his cardiologist told us privately, and the damage would have been severe enough to be irreversible. I have been a nurse for 22 years. I have watched a lot of people fight to stay alive. I know what that costs and I know what it looks like. What I did not know, until Arthur, was what it felt like to fight for someone, not because it was my job, but because the thought of losing them was something I could not make myself accept. My daughter is in remission. She calls every Sunday. Last month, she drove down to Sarasota, and the 3 of us had dinner on the dock, and Arthur told her an embarrassing story about me from our 2nd week of marriage that I had sincerely hoped he had forgotten. He had not forgotten. He remembers everything. I used to think that love was something that arrived the way it does in movies, certain, immediate, unmistakable. I know better now. Sometimes love is the thing that builds itself quietly in the space between dinner at 6 and the sound of pages turning in a library and a hand that finds yours in a waiting room without being asked. I did not expect any of this. I did not plan for any of this, but I would not change a single day of it.